Welcome, everybody. My name is Toby Brooks. I am coming from you from the Sundance Institute. Please know we're so excited to have you here with us at the Sundance Film Festival this year. For a visual descriptor of myself, I am a white male with black curly hair, sitting against a white background with some plants hanging behind me. And yeah, I'm just super thrilled to be here for this panel for Sundance Ignite. I want to thank all of you for attending the Sundance Film Festival and all of our supporters of the festival in general, but particularly today, I want to call out our presenting sponsor of the festival, one of the presenting sponsors of the festival, Adobe. And they are also the founding sponsor of Sundance Ignite. So Sundance Ignite, I'll talk about in a moment, but first we're going to hear a tiny bit about Adobe.
It's dark and glittery. The underdog wins.
When I tell the story, is to show every voice can be heard.
When I tell the story, people feel like they belong.
When I tell the story, I disrupt all expectations.
Back. So, like I said, my name is Toby Brooks. I run the Ignite program here at Sundance Institute. I am also coming to you from the Tongva, Kij, and Chumash land, colonially known as Los Angeles. And I believe we're going to play a brief land acknowledgement for the festival.
For over 40 years, the Sundance Film Festival has been held on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Gojute, and Ute tribal nations. We do land acknowledgements to recognize the traditional stewards of this land and our 500 years of resistance to ongoing colonialism. But can we acknowledge the land without listening to the land? Take a moment to really listen. From the Ute to the Wet'suwet'en, from the Anishinaabe to the Kingdom of Hawaii, indigenous nations all over the world understand that the land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. And we continue to fight for her. Let this land acknowledgement move you beyond symbolic recognition. Let it be your call to action. Support indigenous resistance. Join us in the fight to protect our mother, for our human and non-human kin, for the next 7 generations.
Thank you so much. So a little bit about Sundance Ignite. Sundance Ignite is the Institute's program for filmmakers 18 and audience members 18 to 25 years old. It operates in 2 primary methods and public programs, which is what you're engaging with today. We activate at the festival and some other international festivals that we do year round by providing subsidized access to tickets, and events and panels and networking opportunities for folks. So we're really excited to be here at the 2022 Sundance Festival digitally, and hopefully one day in person again, we'll gather. And then we also, Sundance Ignite operates a fellowship for filmmakers 18 to 25 years old. It is a year-long fellowship for 10 filmmakers who are focusing on launching themselves into the next step of their career. So it focuses on mentorship and creative and professional development throughout the year. The applications for this fellowship open on February 14th and run until March 14th. You can use the QR code right there to learn more, or you can go to sundance.org/ignite or collab.sundance.org/ignite challenge, and it will give you all the information you need to apply for the program. This afternoon, I'm really excited to say that we're going to be screening the short films of the 2021 Sundance Ignite Fellows, who are currently in the midst of their fellowship. It's an amazing group of filmmakers and an amazing collection of films, and that will be playing at 6 p.m. Mountain Time on our platform. I believe that they will be putting the link somewhere in the chat, but we'll put it there also at the end of the Q&A for you to find. You can find it on the Beyond Film section of the festival platform. Enough blabbing about me. And I'm going to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk with our panelists, and then some time for a question and answer from y'all at the end. So I'm going to welcome Chase Joynt and Carey Williams both into the chat here, and give them each a chance to talk about themselves. So both of these filmmakers have films that premiered at the festival over the past few days, which is incredibly exciting. So first and foremost, a huge, massive congratulations to both of you, Chase and Carey. It is such a thrill to see artists get to show their work and have their work reach audiences. I want to start off getting a little bit of a background about who each of you are, get a little bit of an introduction for each of you. So why don't we start with you, Carey, get a little bit, hear who you are.
Yeah, sure. I'm Carey Williams. I'm very happy to be here to chat with you both. Thank you for having me. I am a visual descriptor. I'm a Black male. I newly have a mustache. For some reason, I just decided it. I am sitting in front of a Rorschach-esque background. I have a silver chain on and a t-shirt that has an up sign because we only need to go up. So yeah, I started my filmmaking journey. I'm from Florida, started my filmmaking journey a while ago. I went to film school after going to school for psychology. And I came out to LA, and I was making a lot of music videos because I'm very obsessed with visuals. And somewhere in that process, I started editing, and I edited for years. But at the same time, was trying to keep that filmmaking hustle, the directing hustle alive. So I was doing my edit pay the bills thing during the day, and then trying to write my things at night and shoot things on the weekend. After many years of that hustle and everything, things started to click.
Awesome. I'm excited to hear more about that clicking. But before we do that, Chase, why don't you give a little bit of background about who you are, how you got here?
Hello, everybody. My name is Chase Joynt, and I echo Carey's thanks and enthusiasm here. I love the subject and crowd of this conversation. I am a white transmasculine person in my early 40s in a red and black flannel, sitting in front of a purple wall that was most definitely selected by the owners of this Airbnb and not me, but I'm really rocking it all the way through the festival. And I'm, it's going to become a memorable part of this endeavor for me. I went to theater school at UCLA, and as soon as I got to UCLA, I became immediately enmeshed in an activist circuit and activist communities who were advocating for sexual and gender-based advocacy against violence, working in anti-racist frames. And I turned away from what I felt like was the industrial Hollywood apparatus of the school toward gritty DIY, kind of more punk-inspired, show up and shoot forms of documentary making. And since those early beginnings have come back toward the bigger, more industrial mainstream apparatus. My film that's in the festival right now, which we'll talk more about later, is they're calling it a creative documentary because very few people understand what a hybrid documentary means, and we don't want to undercut ourselves before we start. But what it means is that it's slipping between fiction and nonfiction, and I think that's emblematic of my broader interests, and I'm excited to talk about that further.
I always find it fascinating when documentaries stray from any vague notion of a talking head, kind of how people like to classify it, because they get very uncomfortable when it's not just direct in their faces to an understanding of what it is. I want to kind of start where you guys both left off, a little bit about, you know, the earliest stages. So primarily today, I want to talk about kind of the process that you went through making your first features. This is both your second features, and we'll talk about this as well, but also just kind of in general, your first feature films and the process of getting those made, making that jump from short film to feature film, and kind of the tactile and tangible tips and tricks or whatever that you had kind of going through that journey. And I think the first question I want to start with is, there's always this question. I work a lot with young filmmakers. There's a very, folks never quite know what kind of, where am I supposed to be when I make that jump? What is that leap? What are the signals for me to know that I'm at the right place to start that film? So I'm curious for each of you, when you were kind of a little bit about your background in short film, because I know both of you made a number of short film, and then kind of what were the signals within yourself and within your creative community that gave you that sense that I can expand this storytelling into a longer form? And why don't we start with you, Chase?
Sure. Yeah, I love short films. I think short films are where you learn how to tell stories and where you have smaller containers in which to make many, many mistakes. And I think mistakes are so valuable and they're just so much cheaper. And I say that with all sincerity. You know, I think that my easy gut reaction to your question about when to make the leap is, I think the story tells you when to make the leap. I think that you can recognize the capacity of something that needs more room. And of course, that's related to resources. And that's not just a way to talk about money. It's a way to talk about people. It's a way to talk about time. The amount of resources that it takes to consolidate around a project that's of a feature length is considerable and can be exhausting. And I think requires a kind of plan that I think you learn through, or at least I'll make that an I statement and not a you statement, that I learned through making shorts. Really stretching sort of the boundaries of what was possible in various containers. The Framing Agnes short film, which predates Framing Agnes the feature, which is now at Sundance, was made on credit card debt and the favors of friends. We shot it all in one room in a few days. And I look at that film and I love that film, but I look at it and I'm like, well, that looks like it was shot on a credit card in one room in 3 days. Like, it is what it is. And then I think, you know, if you were to encounter the feature, you wouldn't make any of those same assertions about what the feature is, but it took a long time and it took a lot of endurance through a kind of rejection cycle of funding and a shift change on our team based on people's availabilities to make that leap happen.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying wholeheartedly. For me, like when you should make the jump is it is when it kind of story tells you. But you know, for me, I had been making a lot of shorts you know, on the weekends with friends and stuff like that. And I was also trying to write this thing that, you know, filmmaking is very therapeutic for me. And I was working through a relationship with my mom, you know, like it was a little contentious at the time. And I'd made a short called Cherry Waves that dealt with that in some way. And I wanted to, you know, it kind of opened things for me and, you know, it made me feel like, okay, this actually resonates for people. I want to tell a longer version of that. And so I wrote that longer version. And that's when I was like, well, I'm going to try to make it. And this short is going to open a door for that. You know, the truth of the matter is, you know, that was a long process of almost that never happened. But, you know, the short opened the door for me to, you know, feel like, hey, should tell a longer version of this. And there's currency in that. You know, it made me feel like I can do a bigger thing. It may not happen. It didn't happen, but at least I went for it. And then, going forward, I continued to make shorts, and then, other things, may have come to the fore before that. But the journey of making that writing that feature was therapeutic for me, so it was worth it.
And I'm curious, Chase, you had mentioned kind of that you learn so much about that, and I think that there's a real foundation that is laid when you learn about making shorts, both on a creative level and also a foundational level. And I'm sorry for pushing for specifics, but I'm a stickler for specifics. But like, what do you feel like some of those real kind of foundational blocks that have kind of carried you from the short films, or that you learned on the short films, that really were kind of what you stood upon when you endeavored? Were there any specific things that kind of you took with you from that experience directly into this, from short filmmaking specifically?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there's two different ways that I would answer that question. One of which is maybe a little bit more conceptual, and one of which is very practical. And the conceptual answer is to figure out who you are as a storyteller, and to really figure out like how to grease the various wheels that need to be moving at all times in order to execute your fantasy projections. And it takes practice, and it takes like a kind of continual re-engagement with that work. And I feel like the short format or shorter formats are a really exciting time and place to do that. And the practical level, you're going to think it's a joke, but I learned a lot about things like, maybe don't shoot your whole documentary in a beige room that you can't color correct, or maybe don't make your budget cuts around sound that you can't fix in post, right? Like these very practical things that you do when you're hustling on a budget and when you're strapped for time, that I think now I look back and I'm like, okay, well, you made that choice there, and you're not going to make that choice again. And those are only things you learn by trying and have them perhaps not work out exactly as you had hoped.
Yeah, dude, I gotta jump on that sound thing. Like, making shorts taught me to respect sound, because like I said before, I'm very visual. So I was always like, I wanted to look as, greatly composed and all that stuff. And sound was always kind of like, after having to ADR like 3 projects back to back, and you always know that's not that performance. When you hear the ADR and it's like, it eats you up. And all you can think about is when people see that thing and they're like, it's not going to hit like it should hit, It made me respect sound a lot. So that's something, that's a learning process for me that I had with shorts. And also, I feel like it's the practice of it all. It's like you're greasing your wheel, and you're learning, every time you make something, you're gonna learn something. And if you're not learning something, you should probably stop. So, every time you do something, you're gonna learn a little bit. You're gonna take that and take it to the next thing. And by the time you get to that feature, it's still gonna be a completely whole new beast. And it's gonna be daunting, and you're gonna probably forget half the shit. But that muscle memory will come back to you at some point, a few days in, and you're like, okay, I've been here before. I can handle this situation. It's a different set of obstacles, but I have that foundation of something like this has happened to me that I can, or it has like kind of been a little bit of a, throw me off, that I can bring it back to the vision that I'm trying to create.
Yeah, there's, if you're not looking back on your previous work and having some element of cringe, or looking back and feeling like, why, then you haven't pushed yourself enough kind of in your current work in having grown from those particular things.
I so agree with that. I'll go back sometimes and watch some of my older shorts, and there's some moments when I'm like, yeah, I did that. But I also always see something that I'm like, shit. Now I'm not gonna do that again, or even there's some good ones where it's like, okay, that was kind of cool what I did there. Like, maybe I can do that on the next thing where it is applicable to this project, So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in going back and seeing where you were. If you're here, like, go back and look at that short you made a few years ago. I think you will learn something about your journey as a filmmaker. What stories are you telling now? What are you drawn to, as opposed to what you were doing then? And technically, you might learn something too. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
There's also, I think, one thing that I always tell filmmakers is, like, I learned this from Mike Plant, who is he runs the shorts program here at Sundance. He used to say, and in the nicest way possible, when you're making your short films, you have the luxury of like no one giving a shit about who you are at all. And so like no one cares about your movie, and use that to your advantage completely, because there are like maybe 5 filmmakers who people like are eagerly anticipating their movies, and maybe 1 who people are eagerly anticipating their short films. And so you have the luxury of being able to mess around and make the mistakes and find kind of, you know, stretch your arms and see what you are capable of creatively and technically, without really having to worry about the perception of kind of anyone's audience experience about it. It should really be about learning in that way.
And on top of that, when you're making the feature, you're probably using somebody's money.
Oh, you Carey,
And
we're saying the same things. It doesn't matter who's talking.
Well, that's going to transition into a question I have in just a moment, but I do want to talk about 2 really quick things. One, kind of your first films, how you chose those particular topics, and why those films were the ones that you decided to make that leap with. I know we talked about like timing in terms of your inner, but like specifically the film. And then also, you know, why don't we start with that? And Carey, I'm curious, kind of your first film also is a very specific story that, yeah, I'm curious a little bit about.
Yo, it might sound bad, but I was like desperate. No, it was after years of almost, you know, I really wanted to make a feature, and I felt like this project presented itself to me. It was something that was brought to me like after I made the short film of Emergency, and it was something that I'd never done before. Like the format was this sort of new screen life format, and I had no idea how to make that kind of thing. But I felt like, because I was in that place of like I really wanted to make a movie, I think that informed me of being able to take that leap and take that chance. Because I wonder, like, if it had been years before, if I was not so far along of like trying to make a movie, would I have taken that chance? So I felt like I'm gonna go for this because it's almost like jumping without a net, you know. And what did I have to lose, really? You know, I've been trying for years to make a film, and there's something here that could be really cool if I could figure out a way to do it creatively, you know. So the thing about that film, though, that I needed to do was make it my own, you know, as much as I could. So I was able to talk to the producers, who, you know, were open to allow me to expand that sandbox of this format of screen life to fit my sensibilities, and also let me do a rewrite so that I can infuse, you know, what was very personal and what I cared about into this story. So that's how it worked for me, you know. And thankfully, I'm very happy I did it. I was scared of shit, you know, at the time, but I was like, you know, dude, do I want to be sitting around talking about making a feature in a few months, or making a feature in a few months?
Yeah. And Chase, your film, all of your work is very collaborative, and that kind of extends through your shorts and your features as well. And I'm curious, you know, there's the perception that anyone makes a movie alone is false and completely doesn't exist. And I'm curious how you began to build. How did you choose the people with whom you were working, your producers, your DPs, all those folks? How did you kind of begin to build that crew that was full of people that you trusted and knew that kind of could carry out the visions that you had as a director? And how do you go about that?
It's a great question, and it's really foundational to my practice, because I think a lot of my work is thinking out loud about the powers of authority, and the power of cinema itself to create certain frames of understanding. And in the most recent work that I've been making, I'm speaking specifically about trans and gender nonconforming communities and the ways in which media and medicine have really produced the most enduring frames of our perception. And so for me, at a foundational level, I'm always thinking about crewing and casting with people who are the most impacted by the stories we're trying to tell, period. And so I don't want to be crewing up on subjects from the mid-century and not have trans and gender nonconforming crew behind the camera and running sound and thinking about the specificity of costume, right? And the specificity of people's bodies. Like there's such incredibly powerful nuances to the way in which people will approach those questions if they have a kind of embodied investment in the stories that we're trying to tell. And it also is a willingness to try and think about the structure of the set as one of mentorship and as one that opens up access to those who haven't been groomed through a traditional industrial standard of school and vetting through internships and other forms of privilege, right? And so you can't expect someone to have arrived on set with the same amount of quote set experience or IMDb credits if we have literally all grown up in an environment that has been structured to exclude people like us. So how does our set become a way in which to change those terms? And so that's willingness to have a variety of different kinds of expertise and a variety of different kinds of experience on set all the time, which means you need to slow down.
Have you ever experienced any pushback from like your more industrial producers and financiers and stuff like that, in terms of like, we want a more experienced DP, or we want a more experienced set dresser, or whatever, these kind of things that they invest in money in? Have you ever experienced that pushback? And you also don't have to say so if you don't want.
Yeah. I'll just keep people unnamed. You know, I feel lucky to work in documentary, where I think these conversations are at the forefront of many people's creative agendas. And my move into episodic was through a show that was thinking critically and thinking intersectionally about the dynamics of its set and the dynamics of its subject matter. And so I do feel very lucky, but I do feel a part of a broader cohort of people who are having these fights at every turn and recognizing that they keep encountering like very strong resistance to trying to shift the terms, because the efficiency of the machine will continue to reproduce itself kind of at all costs.
Yeah, for sure. Carey, I'm curious about you. How have you kind of put together the group of trusted crew and support that you have, and have you stayed with those people throughout your films, or have you kind of restarted each time?
Yeah, no, I definitely love to work with people that I've worked with numerous times. Like on this film, I've worked with the DP, Michael Delatorre. I've worked with him I've known him. He's like a brother to me now. I've known him for like 15 years, and he's been with me through the years of struggling and making shorts. He's shot a lot of those shorts, and that was one of those situations where I was out here and I just cold reached out to him because I'd seen a music video that he made or he shot, and I was like, hey, I'm trying to like link up with people that are doing something, and I'm trying to direct. And he's like, well, let's do some work. And that became a working relationship and a friendship over the years. And the editor of the most recent one, Emergency, I just met him and worked with him on RJ. And when you meet people that are so invested and kind and you want to be around with them, you want to keep them, you want to keep working with them. And that's what this guy was. His name is Lam Nguyen. And so yeah, I'm always looking for that. And on this most recent project, I did push for people who hadn't done department head positions to get those opportunities, because that was important to me, to give people that chance, because it is like, there's the whole focus on directors and writers and stuff like that, but there need to be people who are doing costume design that are not getting those opportunities, who are doing sound and doing all these other things, doing hair, those things, those positions people need to get chances in those positions too, because it will help expand the diversity of those positions as well. So it does sort of like change things more than just those, the names that you usually see or who are in front of the camera. And hopefully, we can, I can continue to work with a lot of the people that I met on this project too.
Cool. I'm curious now, just to pivot a little bit to the money, like you both alluded to it. Obviously, for documentary and narrative are very different experiences in terms of how fundraising is done. But Carey, why don't we start with you a little bit? How did you begin to fundraise for the first feature, and kind of what were the inroads or the things that kind of really opened things up for you in a way that kind of triggered, okay, we can actually make this happen, and kind of pushed you to that next space?
Well, my situation was with that one was it kind of came with money already. They brought the project to me, and they had a bit of financing already set. But one issue I did run into with the getting it over the hump to actually go was there was a bit of cast contingent for the money, and that was interesting because I hadn't dealt with that. And I think that that's something that filmmakers making that jump from short to feature might need to mentally prepare themselves for. You may have someone in mind, that's great, but there's this idea that some algorithm or some sort of whatever metric says that they won't get the financier's money back or something like that. So that was one thing that we dealt with a little bit. I dealt with a little bit on that end as far as financing goes, but you finally put the pieces together. It's like maybe a little bit of a sacrifice on one role to get this other role, like the person you want or something like that. But they already had a lot of the money, I think, already locked in.
Cool. So it was a specific thing where someone you were for hire and were not necessarily responsible for building those.
Yeah.
Was it the same?
Right.
Was it the same on Emergency, or how did kind of how did you put that financing together?
Well, I've been fortunate and blessed with these two projects because the Emergency had Amazon, behind it, which they have all the money, right? So so it was kind of I was definitely blessed in that situation of there was a little bit of having to go back and forth about some of the casting, but nothing like the first project, which was a lot smaller budget, a lot less less to work with.
So what you're saying is make a really good short film, have it gangbusters at festivals, and then everything will come your way.
Sure. Yeah.
No, but I mean, it's interesting also. I mean, and that's a whole nother conversation, but kind of there is quite a bit of money behind the streamers and these places that do have funds to make films. And another day, another conversation, if we have time to dig into that, I want to have a little bit of insight on that.
I want to go back to the talking about making a good short. I want to go back for this might be useful to people, but that short Emergency brought those producers brought me to their attention. But it was a short that I had made with two friends in an afternoon that they saw on my website that really sealed the deal, that they were like, oh, this person should be the one that we reach out to. So there's value in that thing. I never submitted that short to film festivals. I just said, I want to create. Here, call my friends, and I put that up, and that was the thing that got me there. So, for anybody who's still, like, oh man, I'm just making shorter shorts, you never know, and that might be that one little jump off for you.
Yeah, for sure. Chase, I'm curious about, obviously documentaries are a little different. There's a lot more institutional funding and granting and stuff like that. I'm curious what your journey with your first film and shorts, and also this film as well, kind of how that money came to play.
Yeah, I can answer it all, and maybe I'll actually start by joining Carey in the endorsement of making shorts for reasons that you might not necessarily know. Because in the context of Framing Agnes, the short that I made, which predates my first feature, ended up serving as a very critical kind of proof of concept, because otherwise people were like, we just don't get it. We don't totally understand what you're trying to do. And I could write synopses and paragraphs until I lost all of my hair. And it wasn't until like being able to submit something and say, this is how it works. Like, this is how we're trying to think about this. This is how it sounds. This is how it feels, that we were able to sort of move it forward. And I'll come back to that in a second, but I will say that I was lucky. My first feature was also funded when I approached the project. And so I was able to really hit the ground running in a way that's very unusual, especially in documentary, and especially in documentaries about minoritized subjects. And Framing Agnes, the feature that I'm here with now, is a micro budget film. It is the product of an extraordinary number of grant applications, an extraordinary number of grant rejections, in part for that reason of people not totally understanding what it is, which I think is the best place to be when you're saying, like, let's think about documentary differently. But it's hard if you think about it from the perspective of a funding body who desires and imagines themselves to be funding certain things. They can't tell if you fit. They can't tell if they want to take a risk on the things that you're doing. And so, I can share some anecdotes if it makes sense to do so in this session about sort of the process of trying to get it funded and enduring those kinds of rejections and the sort of impact it can have on your story, and the lessons that I've learned to really stay true to the project that you want to make, and to not let the market and to not let funding bodies distort the through line of who you are and why you're making the movie that you're making. Because it's very easy to do so when they're like, well, we would fund it if it was a little bit more straightforward. Well, we would fund it if it was a little bit more fill in the blank. And then all of a sudden you're like, what is this movie? And why am I here? And why am I making it? Because it sounds terrible,
I'm curious, either of you know, that kind of leads into another question, but did either of you know or have specific boundaries that you had set for yourselves in terms of what financiers or funders, kind of what access you would allow them into the creative process? And were there any things that you learned kind of in your first few projects of the types of boundaries that maybe you didn't set that you wish you had set in specifically those cases? If you're allowed to talk about what the boundaries that were broken without getting into trouble. But
I mean, I can hop in and just say that I experienced it differently based on the kind of work. So when I moved into television, I knew with 100% certainty that being a director for hire and episodic means that you lose control of your cut the minute you let it go, and that there are many tiers of approvals and creative decisions that are above your head, and you have to really go in recognizing that you do the best you can when you are on the ground and when you are working, and then ultimately, it becomes something else. It becomes of a much bigger whole that has many, many, many cooks in a very big kitchen. And I don't make those kind of compromises in my documentary work. And I would say no to a funding body that would want to intervene upon those kinds of creative questions, because it's not what the work is trying to do. And I think being very clear about that and why you might want to choose to move into a space where you lose a little bit of creative control, but you gain a ton of experience and you gain a ton of connections and you're able to pay your rent for a little while, that's really valuable. That can be like a really value neutral statement. It's not a process of selling out, as we so often say in these kind of indie markets. I'm like, what does that actually mean if you're trying to make a life, right? And then staying true to the things that can take a lot more time to manifest.
Chase, I'm curious for you, how did that feel for you as a director when you made the episodic and it was it's pretty much gone after you're moving on, and then you see it and you're like, oh, okay, that's what they did. How did that feel? I'm curious about that.
I'm really grateful for the opportunity and I love it. It's like, if you're an adrenaline junkie, I think episodic for hire is such a fun place to be. But I felt really grateful to go in with friends who were already in that space, who had very clearly set up my expectations. To be like, here's what you can do and here's what's not possible. And don't try to make something possible that structurally does not exist. And I am so happy for that, because I think it would have been really hard for me. I'm a very controlling maker in my mind, even if I don't perform it as such, right? And so I would really have a hard time. And so I also started advocating early in the stage where I got the script, and I was like, well, here's the time where what you shoot is what's on that page. And so if you arrive on set and you don't like something that's on that page, you're locked into a kind of place that multiple people are now beholden to. And so if you can get those changes in play earlier on, then you're not problem solving retroactively.
Yeah. Okay. I selfishly asked because I've been very enticed by moving into television and working in episodic, and but I've asked numerous people like, what's that process like? And it's I wonder how it'd be with letting go of that just completely and not being a part of the edit.
Yeah, and I think no show is the same, right? So I definitely am speaking
Yeah.
from a very limited vantage point, but.
What about you, Carey? What kind of buffer did you put for yourself in terms of how the kind of more institutionalized elements of this industry start, what creative decisions they were allowed to make on the film? Obviously, a script has a very different life in terms, kind of on its journey to getting made. And kind of who did you allow to have a say in what was being told?
I mean, on the first film, I just didn't, it was so much, everything was new, like the format of it. Like we previs the whole film before we ever shot it, like literally scene for scene. We spent months like doing that. I partially feel like that's something we should not have done, because I think it created an expectation of what the film was going to be. They could reference that and say, oh, this doesn't look like what you prevised. But I feel like it's interesting, because I was given a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to do, but also there were things that I have a story about it a little bit. There was I don't know if I should tell that story.
I think you should.
Well, it's just there's freedom, but there's also this feeling of like, are you making the type of film that we do? And even if I had said, hey, I want to expand a sandbox and do something different, it was a little bit of like over the shoulder, like, are you making the kind of film that we make? But as far as when we talk about like financing goes, I don't think I encountered that much interference as far as from financiers. I wasn't really sure who was financing it, to be honest. And I dealt with one person directly, and that person was pretty cool to work with. There was a little bit of a language barrier in some ways, which might have contributed to that for us, but it was, I don't know if I'm contributing anything useful to this part of the discussion.
Totally. But I want to also.
I'm rambling.
I want to also ask, both of you, this kind of plays into this a little bit, but both of you are making, specifically on Framing Agnes and Emergency and Chase, your film talks a lot about specifically the kind of idea and of visibility in general, and kind of the that kind of the dual-edged sword of what visibility is. And I'm curious, both of your films are very like culturally relevant, I would say, at the moment, in the sense of like they're things that are being talked about a lot culturally, but there's also a little bit of a gold rush and a gold mining on the other side of that, of people wanting to tell stories specifically about the Black experience, about trans people and trans visibility. That can, oftentimes lead to very extractive notions of kind of storytelling, and kind of how do you guys as filmmakers endeavoring on these types of stories, how did you kind of go about making sure that the folks who were funding your films and kind of the entire process of making these films was done in a way that felt genuine to how you wanted to tell the story, and kind of protect yourself from kind of the extractive nature of kind of the capitalistic elements of film and the film industry? That's kind of a toothy question, so if I can narrow it down if you want, but either of you can start, just jump in.
You want to start, Chase?
Sure. Yeah, sure. It's a great question, and it's a really complicated one. So I think the first thing that I will say is, anytime you're in an environment where people are like, now's the moment for trans representation, or now is the focus on Black cinema, anyone who's doing it is like, I'm sorry, we've been doing this for a very long time. Like, nothing about this is new. Like, nothing about our identities is new. And it's a market turn that should be identified as exactly that. And so, I think as a maker who makes work that is closely related to my identity and community, the communities of which I am a part, you know, I always like to be thinking critically about that in my work itself. And this is the benefit of documentary for me in a lot of different ways, and in creative sort of hybrid spaces, is we get to ask the question, you know, what does it mean to be in this moment of heightened visibility that produces a fantasy of social change that totally obscures the contexts of ongoing violence against trans people, right? That is the paradox of our contemporary moment. And so in a project like Agnes, we ask that question. And in many ways, Agnes argues for invisibility as a very important, you know, political move, a political gesture that says, like, you don't get our stories. We don't get to conclude this. You don't get to know everything. We're going to walk away from the camera. We're actually going to change the frame, right? And so I think that that's, to me, why cinema is so exciting. That's why we want to keep trying to make these stories. And I don't think it's exclusive to documentary where we get to make those choices. It's about the kinds of narrative work that we want to be doing that aren't, I think, to your point, Toby, about a kind of like opportunistic politics of inclusion that says, like, oh, well, we have a story that's all about whiteness, but let's pop a person of color in here to make sure that we're diversifying our cast, when it is still a story about whiteness and it is still a story about white people, right? So, like, come on. And so how do we actually be thinking differently? And that is also about who's making those stories, who's writing those stories, who's shooting those stories. And it comes from that place that what arrives on screen will be and feel different.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you know, for me, it's like, I feel like there's a lot that, like, you know, Chase, like you said, you know, these stories have been told and we've been talking about this. And for me, I have a fatigue of Black trauma in film. And it's, you know, what I was excited about with this was really showing a friendship between a couple of guys that was nuanced and was a story of two Black men who actually saw the world differently, which I think a lot of times it's seen to be one way. It's like, you know, they're two Black guys, they're gonna think the same way about this one issue, but no, they don't. And I love that our studio and our producers were supporting us in telling a story that wasn't just leaning into Black trauma. It was leaning into a friendship that shows love between these two guys at the end of it, and that's really more what it's about than that, you know, the police brutality and that kind of thing. It's there, we know that it's been with us, but there's other lenses to look at that issue. And if we can, you know, look at this issue of how do these guys react to this, and what is the fear and anxiety doing to them, what's their relationship, what is it, you know, that kind of thing, I think was exciting for me to lean into. It's something new and different. I think people needed to see, you know, and I think hopefully that's what will resonate with people, is like, we've seen a lot of those stories before, but this is something that is showing us a different angle of it.
For sure. And, you know, yeah, I'll leave it at that because, whoa, my light is all weird. The sun is streaming. It's like you just brought in the sun. But yes, thank you guys both for those very honest questions. I think it's a really interesting time. It can feel so, it can feel very transparent when kind of, Chase, what you were saying, when folks are just like throwing things at stories for the sake of like their kind of moment in time. And it can feel very like, it shows up on screen in a way that feels disingenuous and feels uncomfortable and awkward to watch. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why both of your films kind of stand out so much, is because they are not awkward in that, like, it feels very unput upon in that sense. I want to turn a little bit to the notion of success. A lot of folks, when they are launching into their first kind of larger projects, you know, we have because this is a capitalistic and industrial type of art, and kind of always has been in its nascency. The success of kind of how you define success for your work and for projects that you're working on can be very heavily emphasized on monetary kind of markers and market-based markers. I'm curious for both of you, what kind of endeavoring for a young filmmaker who's endeavoring into kind of these larger projects, what are some of the benchmarks that you have set for yourself that have been really fruitful and kind of gauging your own success and gauging your own kind of gratification with the work itself? Carey, why don't we start with you?
I want to buy a house. I want to buy my mama a house. You know, that's like straightforward. But for me, success is, I don't know what success is really. I mean, it's like, I want to be able to continue to create and, you know, have opportunities. If that's success, that would be success to me, is like, you know, I don't have another 10-year run or 10+ year run of like trying to get something off the ground. You know, it's like there's opportunities for me to you know, use my voice and make something that hopefully touches people. So that would be a success for me. You know, and yeah, I don't need to have all the money. I don't need to have all the cars and all the riches, but being able to continue to walk this filmmaking journey is my thing.
Yeah, I really resonate with that answer. And I think that it's interesting, you know, our team, which is a small hustle of a team, you know, has been reflecting on this moment of being at Sundance, which can so quickly obscure the hustle and make it seem like, here we are, we've arrived. And, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about is like, we can't wait to continue working, but we want to be working together and feel more supported. And that is actually kind of a financial conversation. It's like, we want to pay people more. We want more time. We want more time. And so that to me feels like an exciting move to consider. But, you know, to return to your question about like, what does it mean to feel successful? For me, I'm most bolstered these days by the experience of those that are in my film and that I've collaborated with, feeling like it is theirs and that we are together in this world with this thing that lives and breathes and doesn't like stop and start when you click start and go on the Sundance portal, right? Like it's something that's living, and that something, you know, my co-writer Morgan M. Page and I always say, we feel like we're still writing the film. We were writing it through the edit, we were writing it in post, and in some ways the conversation continues. And that for me is the most bolstering feeling.
Yeah, there's also the interesting dynamic of like writing it with the audience when they engage with it, because you kind of in some ways lose control of the script, and it can be completely turned into something in wonderful ways that you maybe didn't anticipate. We're closing in on our Q&A session here, so just a quick a quick heads up to folks that there's a Q&A box that we want to hear from you and answer some of your questions as well. So please shoot some questions into the Q&A and we'll get to those. But before we do, I just want to ask kind of the most basic of questions, but what is like kind of one major thing that going into you know, the switch from shorts to features that you felt like you wish you had, like going, you know, from your first feature to your second feature, what was kind of one real piece of whatever that that you feel like would have been helpful to have round one that you had round two? Or maybe it's just get a bigger budget and more people to work with and more time.
Well, you know, I think one of the things that we don't often talk about is that there's the budget of making the film, and then there's the budget about getting the film into the world. And they're not the same budget. And I think that when we come out of indie spaces, all of our resources make the thing. And then you recognize when you're in a market of others, some have this extraordinary extra pot of money where all of a sudden their film is all over the place and splashed and dashed in ways that motivates people to click and start watching, right? And so there's something that I'm learning about how to stay true to your project, but to think about the visibility of your project when it's in the market that matters. And that doesn't mean that you need $1 million. I think it means that you actually need to just be thinking like, what are the organic ways that we can animate and generate momentum around our project for those who we care about and who might want to see it, and sort of start those kind of sparks earlier on. And I think you only learn that through trial and error, and sort of the sooner you can start brainstorming with your team, I think the easier it'll feel when you arrive in the world with your project.
Yeah, that's what I wish I had in round one that I had in round two. Is that what you're saying? That was the
Yeah.
question. Yeah. Uh, I think a better sense of how to listen, you know, to people around me, and also better sense of how to handle little situations that my insecurity slash confidence did not allow me to, face. And there were things that happened on the first film that I just let build up instead of confronting it at the beginning in a positive way, or at least a open way that could have made everything a lot easier. And I think on round two I went into it knowing that. So I think there's this thing about coming from a short where you're so used to it all being a small group of people, a smallish group of people, and there's not so many different things going on, and there's more control. And when you get to the feature, you lose so much control in a lot of ways, and that's scary. And when you get scared, you sort of I think you can tense up, and you can all those things. So going in round two, I felt like I'd learned from that process. So it's important to not feel like you have to control everything, and everything's not on your back. You've got a lot of wonderful collaborators around you that will help you, if you listen to them and open up to them.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I want to get to some of these questions because we have some great ones coming in, and please shoot them in as you hear anything come up in your head. But why don't we start with this one, to restate a question of mine. What monetary goals did you feel were most important to hold tight to when you were trying to find the success of your feature films? So important things such as, was it, budget for the cast members, or monetary bundle for things on the back end, festival application fees, etc. And I guess I would add to that, Chase, you kind of mentioned it, but was there a line item that you were totally taken surprised by that you just wish you had known needed to exist prior to going into the production?
Music budget for me, seriously, music is very expensive. If you're planning on putting some needle drops in your project, be prepared to pay for that. So that's something that going forward, because I love music, and it's all over my projects. And going forward, I would make sure we have a big budget for that.
Yeah, there's two ways I would answer. One is, it was foundational and critical to me that we paid people what they deserved, and that was non-negotiable, especially the trans people on my project, who so often are asked to join projects for the visibility of diversity and not for any kind of financial gain that benefits them. And I'm absolutely not, not on our set. And that means contorting different parts of your budget to accommodate that priority, right? Because it's not about finding money, it's kind of about shifting the terms of what you have to make sure that those priorities stay sound. And the line item that I always wish I had more of was a contingency in post. And what I mean by that is, I got very, very far into Agnes, and then realized at some point we had missed a mic cord that was out on someone's skin, and people would be like, "It's fine, it's a documentary." And I was like, it's a mic cord on the person we look at the longest in this film. No way, And
gotta paint that out.
I was like, we are painting that mic cord out. It is the wildest VFX of the documentary. But I'm so happy to have been able to find this small pot of money, which is never what you want. You never want to be spending that much money on mistakes you made that if you had spent 1 second paying attention to. Just to be clear, I was the person interviewing this person. So I was looking at the mic cord the whole time, apparently, and just so engrossed in what we were doing that I missed it. But that kind of stuff can really elevate your film in the end. And sometimes you've run out of money when you get to that point.
Chase, it's very easy to do. Very easy to just miss those things that are right in your face. And later you're like, you're sitting in the edit ray and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It was the worst.
I know that if I attempted to make a movie, it would just be like just chock full of mistakes that I would be just ripping my hair out during post, because I'm not a pre-planner, and that would be that would be a challenge for me. Curious. Okay, cool. So when was the moment that you knew that this was a world that you could work in, and how did that come about for you, and how long did that take for you to happen? So how did you know that you were going to be a filmmaker and that you could maybe do something tangible in it?
I feel like I knew that I was going to be a filmmaker when I was watching a lot of films in my room as a babysitter. You know, they were babysitting me, but it took many years after that to actually do something about it. You know, I didn't have that that push of like, hey, go be a filmmaker. That wasn't something that was like, you know, said to me as like, you could do that. You know, it's more get a practical job. But I think when it actually hit for me was when I volunteered on a set. I was in school for psychology, and I volunteered on a set, and I was like, I love seeing how this all gets put together. And it felt really real for me in a tangible way that, you know, there are all these people working together to make this thing. And yeah, but it's still, you know, it takes time after that. You sit there and you learn and you watch and you see how the family dynamic of a set is. And, you know, you start to let that seep in your bones. So yeah, that was me.
Yeah, I feel like I have a very promiscuous relationship to genre, and to form. So I'm not beholden to cinema as the only way in which we or I should be telling stories. But I think it can be one of the most dynamic, and to Carey's point about the kind of familial nature of sets and the all hands on deck collaborative requirement to get movies done, it's incredibly exciting to me. And, you know, I think that there's something interesting in your question about how did you know that this is the world you wanted to be in? And I think I would pivot on that question a little bit to say, I think it's one of the ways I'm trying to make the world that I want to be in. I think that making movies in this way are a way to try to open up those possibilities, because I'm not sure the world that we're in is like all that awesome. And so I think we need to like figure out other ways forward.
Talk about it, Chase.
You sure you want to buy the ticket to this show? Yeah, that's great. I want to answer this question because this is a question I had as well that I didn't get to talk to you guys about. But both of you, both Agnes and Emergency, started as short films, and I'm curious if both of you could talk a little bit about how do I narrow this question down into kind of something a little more focused, but about the process of the kind of short to feature pipeline. I guess part one was, did you intend to, were these intentional calling cards that you always wanted to make into a feature? Or was this something that you kind of decided that made sense to be expanded? Because it's a tricky question. I think a lot of filmmakers, you know, if you can tell a short in a short, leave it as a short. So like, there's, you know what I mean? So like, how did you know that these were films that you had a lot more to say on, and kind of what was the process in expanding those?
Sure. Emergency was not intended to be a feature. It was intended as a standalone short, and I sort of willed it to be a feature when someone asked me if we were making a feature version of it, and I just said yes. And so the writer Katie Davila was like, okay, well then let's talk about what that looks like. But she was adamant that she would not do it if it was just to do it. She had to, you know, think about, why does this need to exist? And, you know, for me, my excitement was to get an opportunity to expand on the relationship between the two guys from the short, you know, the fear and anxiety that they hold, the, you know, that make a commentary about, you know, Black masculinity and those things like that. And, you know, thankfully she was able to find what spoke to her with like making this a one night tense thing and still keep her commentary that she wanted to make about how people, you know, are seen and how they think about how they're being perceived. And I was able to infuse those elements that I wanted to do. So once we decided to make that, we took it out to some production companies and they brought it to Amazon. And thankfully we did have the short film that people could see that they liked, that made them feel like, okay, we'll do this, and probably was what helped me to get to direct the feature, you know, having that sample that I'd made the short that rode that tonal, you know, tightrope between the comedy and the drama.
Yeah, I love the tonal tightrope is a great phrase that I'm going to steal and use, but I will attribute it to you accordingly. You know, the short version of Framing Agnes was the best we could do with what we had. Period. There's no way we could have figured out how to do more with what we had at the time. And I think it could have lived as a short, but with other kinds of resources, we knew explicitly that we were just scratching the surface of a much more complicated project that could ask a much more complicated set of questions. And, you know, it's a little bit of a detour. I'll spend a little bit of time answering it, but, you know, if you were to watch both, you would also be able to see the way in which the landscape of representation of trans and gender nonconforming people has changed so dramatically since the 2019 premiere of the short and the 2022 premiere of the feature. And so in part, even though we're using the same kind of archival source material, that in both, what we do with it is very different. And I think that that's exciting and interesting. And it's only a product of having had so many years between the first and second versions of the project.
It's interesting you say that, because when I remember seeing the short in 2019 and it feeling like the notion of the, like, kind of medicalizing of the experience was something that I hadn't really like engaged with much. And then this time I was like, oh yeah, like I like so much of the language that you were using was stuff that I had kind of learned over the past 2 years, or had like kind of increased my own kind of fluency in. And it's interesting you say that, because I hadn't really thought about that until just now.
Yeah, for sure.
The speed at which it's happening is wonderful, but as your film points out, also a little challenging. Cool. All right, what else do we have here? I'm gonna save that for last. But how did you deal with moments where you were faced with maybe something you didn't know how to do or handle, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, all those things where you're kind of like driving a car that you're like, oh shit, do I know how to drive this car? But you're already driving, so you have no choice but to keep going. So I'm curious how you navigated those moments.
I don't know. I feel like I constantly have those moments, you know, like you kind of feel like you forgot what you're doing. And then after that, like literally driving up and you see trailers and you're like, oh shit, what do I do? Like it happens. But then it's like you have to center, right? And just go, okay, wait. In the moments, there's moments when, you know, I'm in scenes, and there are times when I get asked questions I don't know the answer to. And I'm notorious for just like, I'll get back to you on that. And usually I feel like the person who asked that question has an answer that they want you to validate. And by the time I come back to them, they're like, well, I was thinking this, or whatever. I was thinking about doing this. And you go, yeah, that's great. But you have had time. For me, I've had time to process it, think about it, let them present their, you know, desired, you know, result, and say, yes, that's great, or well, what about something else, you know, or whatever. So I guess short answer is leaning on your collaborators. Really, you know, you put them in those positions for a reason, and you're not supposed to know everything. You cannot know everything. And so don't beat yourself up when you don't know the answer to everything. Just go, you know what? I don't know, or I'll get back to you. That's my answer.
Not only can you not know everything, you can't do everything, period. And so it requires a level of trust and agility and fluidity. And I think that for me, the lessons that I've learned over time are what are the things that I actually don't really have to care that much about. Like there's so many creative decisions that get made where I'm like, you are very good at your job. You're going to make a choice that's going to be awesome. If it's slightly different than the choice that I would make, do I care? Like, I'm not the kind of director who's like so obsessed with that kind of thing. I'm obsessed with lots of things, don't get me wrong. And this is the latter part of my answer, which is like, figure out where you get stuck and figure out if it's worth it. And so there are things that I will trouble over and wonder over, and I will stop something in place if I feel like it's taking us, but there are tons of things that are not in that category. I would say the majority of things are not in that category. And that's where your pre-production and that's where your prep and that's where your teamwork really matters, because when you hit the ground together, you've had a lot of these conversations. You understand that, you know, one of the early phrases in my film education that always sticks with me is like, are we making the same film? Like when we hit the ground every day, are we making the same film? And where the kind of conflict comes is when you recognize that someone is making a different film than the film that you're making. And that's like not going to work. Let's just be really clear. And so the more you can like figure out the film you're making prior to starting to make it, the easier it is to get ahead of some of those problems that can feel stressful or can spark the insecurities that we all have in us as we're trying to do these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's that it goes back to that notion of also hiring, like how you hire and how important kind of surrounding yourself with people are. And look, not everyone's going to be able to know to put the mic, you know, underneath the shirt instead of on top of the shirt. I'm kidding. This is a good that I think is really important that just came in, which is when you're as a creative, how do you stay motivated or keep your creative oil kind of running, so to speak, between projects when you say don't necessarily, I mean, most filmmakers I know have like 37 things that they're working on at one time. But when you find those moments where you don't necessarily have something you're working on directly, or you're kind of at lack of inspiration, what are the things that kind of buoy you to stay creative in your practice?
Want me to go first this time? Sure. I think having projects in different stages is very valuable to me. So there's always extraordinary joy in the early development stage where you don't have to say no to anything because you're just having ideas. And then things get more constricted as they get closer to production. And so I find value in that spacing. I work with my friends, which I find enduringly joyful. And when I'm feeling really stuck, I just start watching the work of people who are doing extraordinary things. And I find that being around other people's incredible choices can all so often unlock those places in you that are feeling stuck or uninspired.
Cool. Yeah. I quickly learned that if you don't have multiple things going on and you've got this one project that you're waiting to get off the ground, it's miserable. It is a lot of clicking on your emails, waiting for that call. And so you have to have multiple things, at least that you're working on, that take up your joy, like I'm excited about this thing too. That other thing's working, but I can put my thoughts and, hopes and dreams into this as well, or whatever it is. Aside from that, because I personally am so into visuals, I started, taking up photography. I bought a bunch of cheap like cameras on eBay and would go around and take a bunch of pictures and shit, just to, keep myself like my eye like focused on things and trying to, keep my compositions, oiled. But I think the biggest thing is have multiple things that you're excited about, that you can not just obsess over one thing that sad to say is probably not going to happen. It's that other thing that is going to happen, and if you're excited about it, happy about it, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think Carey, that's a really, really important point, that you like just say yes, like keep your doors open to everything, because like so many filmmakers who I work with are, you know, super hell-bent on like a particular project that they're working on, or something that they kind of like have been writing for 5 years, and like they feel like now is the time, and something else comes in and takes that energy away from it. And sometimes you have to make that pivot, you know, when that happens, and you never know what that is unless you say yes to both kind of your own creative process, as well as the creative process with kind of just exploring and just like futzing around with stuff and seeing kind of what you stumble upon.
Yeah, dude. And I feel like also too, just to add to that too, I think that that thing that you might have obsessed over, when you get busy working on something else and it takes you away from it, you might have the opportunity to look back on that thing that you obsessed over and go, you know, I'm in a different place now. Like I'm okay with letting that go, you know. Or you go, I still want to make that, and you still have it there to obsess over more. But you know, it does give you, having other things does give you that like choice, or at least a chance to let it go if it's not, you know, where you're at by the time you go back to it.
Awesome. All right, there's so many good ones here. I think we have time for a few more. I'm curious, this is a little bit more process questions. Why don't we talk about the final cut process of your film? So how did the final cut process go with your film? How were you able to be in charge of the final cut, or did you have to make compromises that you didn't necessarily agree with? Carey, I saw you have a little grin spread across your face that was more of a grimace. So I'm curious if you want to jump in there and kind of talk about what that was like.
Let me tell you, editing is like my love and the bane of my existence, because you know, I spent many years editing, and I got to the place where when I direct stuff, I'm able to let things go. But it's, you know, it's also that place where a lot of people can start to, again, come in and try to make choices, or, you know, have influence over your work. And it's scary, because, you know, you put together something that you feel really strongly about, and people will just watch it and go, well, you know, I don't like that, or I don't do that, or whatever. And you have to fight for things. And I you know, I'm not at a place where I have final cut. I don't think many people have final cut, that, you know, these days, or I don't know how, but I ain't in that place. And I will say, with that, it teaches you to have a damn good reason for everything that's in the film. When you turn that shit in, and people are going to challenge like, oh, why do you need this scene, or why do you need this sequence? You need to know and tell them why it's important. You may not win, you may still lose that battle, but you got to pick the battles, because there's going to be, and it's very important, I think, to like be able to say, okay, I can let this one go, but I'm really going to fight for this one and hold on to that one. So yeah, it's a struggle, but it's such a great place to craft your film into something that you may not have thought it was going to be, make it better, you know, or whatever it is. So yeah.
Chase, what about you?
Yeah, I think Carey's answer is more relevant here. I mean, I made a scrappy documentary where I had total final cut, because we were cutting it until we locked it. And, you know, I was beholden to no one but the team, in the choices that we made. Yeah, totally. And it's a very different style of making, and a different genre of making. But to me, I love editors. I think editors are extraordinary storytellers and extraordinary humans. And as a director, I always want to be thinking like an editor, or thinking for an editor, because there's choices that you can make that make the editor's life feel expansive and collaborative and like they're with you. And then there's choices you can make that make it feel really sticky and like a grind. And so being in collaboration with the edit before you even start shooting, I think can be really valuable.
And I think,
yeah. And
go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna also add to that too, like going back to what Chase, what you said about everyone making the same film. that's very helpful when you get to the edit process. If your producers, the people that are going to be able to say, no, you have to make it this way or make these changes. It's so key that they are making the same film, because when you fight for those choices that you make, or that you made in the edit, if they're making the same film, the conversation is better, because we're kind of speaking the same language in that way, right? So that's very key, to make sure your collaborators are on the same page before you shoot. Then when it gets to the edit, at least the fight is a little bit like, we can at least, have a real discourse about it, as opposed to like, we don't know, we were not on the same page.
Additionally, like, the collaborators are so important, because, you have to have the humility also in the edit, where you are able to acknowledge that maybe you don't necessarily, like, you're seeing it from a very emotional place of the story and feeling obviously very emotionally attached to certain elements of the story and certain scenes, characters, actors, whatever, like memories from the set itself that you want to like preserve in the film. And having collaborators that you feel that can trust you, when, especially when you don't have final cut, or who can say, if someone says, we need to cut 15 minutes out of this film or whatnot, people who will say, like, hold your hand through and be like, it's okay if we lose this, like, or it's just not working, or like, you're attached to this for this and this reason, and it's not necessarily serving the film in the ways that it's going to, because it doesn't always, that which you're holding on to doesn't always translate to the viewer, and making sure that you have people surrounding you who can both be an ally to you and also be an kind of a devil's advocate to you, when in a way that you trust and feel comfortable with, I think is really, really important.
And the one thing I'll add is that
So
we're talking a lot about that what you're holding on to, but the other important consideration is that what you're excluding. And there's a very particular example in the context of framing Agnes, where we were deep into full cuts, and my editor at some point, there was a section that was missing, a foundational section at the beginning of the film, because I was kind of tired of it and I thought it wasn't particularly interesting. And my editor was like, well, we can make that choice, but it's a question of audience. And so without that chunk, your audience is going to need to know a whole lot in order to go on this ride for you. With that choice, they have to do a lot less work to get into the story.
Right.
And I was like, oh, right. Okay, let's put that right back in. It was very clarifying, but I was stuck trying to strip, and they were able to help me bring things back in.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I think we probably have time for one more question. I know there are so many good ones here. We'll do 1.5 more questions because I can't help it. But I'm curious just a little bit, obviously very different experiences. This is a heavy question, not heavy, but toothy question that we probably shouldn't ask with 3 minutes left. But why don't we parse it down to, what would you say in terms of subjects and in terms of actors are 1 or 2 things that you really feel like are foundational to having a successful relationship with your actors and or your subjects? Very obviously different experiences, but I'm curious, because I think that is something that a lot of young filmmakers need to learn to navigate, is the relationships with the kind of performance collaborators, which we have not touched on. Chase, why don't you start with this one?
Sure. I mean, in the context of framing Agnes, my participants are actors, are actual, people who are employed in the world as actors. And so it's a hybrid pursuit. For me, it's all about prep. It's all about pre-production. Sometimes you don't have access to actors and participants prior to, but if you do, I think that foundational getting to know you work really matters. And for me, it's far less about the practicality of lines and story, and much more about rapport and trust building. Because if you can build a relationship and set up ways of communicating with each other that make sense, then you can pivot and improvise and do things on set and in front of the camera that feel good to you both. And without that, you have to learn how to find those grooves in real time on set. And as we all know, that you don't have a lot of time. And so any kind of chance for prep or relationship building prior to is significant, integral.
Is the question like, how do you build a relationship with your actors? Is that
Sure, yeah,
basically
what do you think was, what are a few things that were kind of really successful in making sure that you had that kind of a strong relationship with your actors that produced the kind of work that you wanted to be on screen?
Okay. Something I always do first is I make a mixtape of music. You know, it may seem like whatever, but I think that's very important for me to give a wavelength of, you know, what this film is, and like, you know, music can evoke such mood, I think, in conversations, you know, like I think you know, being able to ask the actors, what do you think about this character? You know, you've read the thing, and you know, I have my thoughts, but I'm interested in what you feel about it. What is your take? And then getting the actors to talk to each other, you know, as much as possible. I used to not care about rehearsals, you know, and I still don't think I care that much about rehearsals. I care more about the actors getting to know each other. There's value in rehearsals though, you know, because that's where you can work some things out and really, you know, see what you know, what it looks like before the day. But yeah, I think, you know, that's and you know, there's yeah, I don't want to take up too much time because I know we're running. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously all of these questions, and I'm so sorry we weren't able to get to every question because I know there's so many wonderful questions, and there's so much to know about making film in general and making your first film, and I think you guys both did a really beautiful job in elucidating and illuminating some of the mysteries that may exist. So I wanted to start off by saying a huge thank you to both of you for your time and your energy and your knowledge and sharing all of that. It's incredibly generous, especially given the exciting and busy weeks I'm sure you guys are both deeply enmeshed in. So thank you guys both for being here with us. And yeah, I just appreciate your candor and transparency. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Wonderful. I also want to thank again our partners in Sundance Ignite, Adobe, who have been with us for a million years, and without them, this program would not exist. And I hope that you guys all are able to join us tonight at 6 p.m. Mountain Time to watch the screenings of the 2021 Sundance Ignite and Adobe Fellows. That will, I believe they're going to drop the link to the page in our Beyond Film program. There it is. So if you click there, you can join us. Screening followed by a Q&A with the filmmakers. You will unfortunately have to see me again blabbing, but it's pre-recorded, so it was all edited, don't worry. Yeah, join us for that. And if again, the application for the 2022 fellowship, which will commence this summer, hopefully in person, fingers crossed. Filmmakers get to be with each other again in human. So the application for that launches on February 14th, closes March 14th. You can go to sundance.org/ignite or collab.sundance.org/ignite challenge to find out more information. And all you need is a 0 minute to 15-minute short film, as well as some sort of treatment or lookbook or something of a film that you're planning on working on for the upcoming year. And I think it's a great program. I hope you hope folks apply. It's a really great time. So again, thank you everybody for joining us and for your time and energy. It was a great conversation. And if you have not had a chance to see either Emergency or Framing Agnes, I don't know if their tickets still available at all or what, but I imagine they will be out in the world soon. And yeah, so thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye, everybody.